The great Murray Walker would often say, anything happens in Grand Prix racing, and it usually does.
Right up there. Oh, I'm sorry.
This unpredictability of F1 makes it so great. The World Championship spanning months of racing in multiple continents can sometimes come down to a single moment. One knife-edge moment that can lead to triumph or despair. F1 history is absolutely littered with these what-if moments, and especially so for wonky-nosed Frenchman and Grand Prix legend Alain Prost. A man who in his early career gained a reputation as someone doomed not to win the championship. In his first 4 seasons, he won more races than anyone else in the same time period, at a strike rate of roughly a win every 5 races. So how many titles could he have won? I put it to you, he could have, and arguably should have won, 7 world championships. If you enjoyed this video, why not give it a like? If you want to see more, why not subscribe? This is Mostly Racing, my name is Nick, not sure I've ever said that, and let's do this. Prost won both the French and European F3 titles, and was on the radar for several F1 teams. He ended up signing for McLaren for his debut season, which was solid, if not unspectacular. The McLaren M29B, C, and M30 were not the team's finest racing cars ever, and he only picked up 5 points, while his experienced and Grand Prix winning teammate John Watson scored 6. Prost came 16th in the World Championship, and he jumped ship, team, from McLaren to Renault for 1981. Prost has said he left because of the large number of breakages on the car and because he felt the team blamed him for some of the accidents through the season. Put simply, he and the team had a falling out. The Renault RE20B and RE30 were fast. The turbo-powered Renault V6 engines were unreliable. Out of the 15 races that season, Prost only managed to finish 6 of them, and all 6 were podium finishes. He won his first Formula 1 Grand Prix at the French Grand Prix of that year, beating former teammate John Watson by 2 seconds. This was round 8 and only his second finish that year, which put him 6th in the championship, 24 points behind the leader Carlos Reutemann. Renault reliability improved for the second half of the season, which saw Prost pick up 2 more wins and 2 more runner-up spots, and saw him finish the season 5th, only 7 points behind the champion Nelson Piquet. Despite being within the Grand Prix victory of the World Championship, I think it's probably too much of a stretch to say there was one standout moment which cost him the title, considering he was never really in the title battle, and only got close thanks to an end-of-season run. He was already out of title contention by the penultimate round of the Canadian Grand Prix, so we move on. The Renault RE30B was again fast, but again unreliable. Prost's season got off to a great start, having won the first 2 races in South Africa and Brazil, and had an 11-point lead over that man again, John Watson. However, Prost wouldn't score another point for another 8 races until the British Grand Prix. By this point, Didier Pironi was the championship leader with 35 points, while Prost was tied 5th with Riccardo Patrese on 19 points. Prost would stand on the second step of the podium twice in the second half of the season, and didn't achieve much more. He finished the season 4th in the championship, 10 points off champion Keke Rosberg, and again there wasn't a standout moment which cost him the title, just the season-long unreliability of the Renault. The Renault RE40 was fast, and for once, the Renault V6 Turbo was reliable. Reliable for the time anyway. He didn't score points for the first couple of races, before finishing on the podium 6 times in the next 9 races, 4 of which were victories. By round 11 of 15 at the Austrian Grand Prix, Prost was leading the championship on 51 points, with the closest challenger being Piquet on 37. However, in the final 4 races, Prost's title challenge fell apart. Round 12, Dutch Grand Prix. He retired from 2nd place due to his suspension giving up, 8 points lead over Arnoux. Round 13, Italian Grand Prix. Retired from 4th place due to a turbo blowout, 2-point lead over Arnoux. Round 14, European Grand Prix. Finished 2nd, 2-point lead over Piquet. Round 15, the championship finale in apartheid South Africa. F1 never changes. I'll save you the permutations, but Piquet was comfortably leading early on. If Piquet won, Prost would still be champion if he finished in the top 3. He started 5th, but had fought his way up to the championship position of 3rd by lap 34 of 77. On the very next lap, that pesky Renault Turbo decided that Prost isn't allowed success and packed in. Piquet would eventually finish 3rd, having backed off and won the title by just 2 points. This was the first of Prost's what-if moments. Had Prost managed to get to the end of the race, he would have been world champion. It was a bright cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Enjoy that literary reference in your racing video. Through the previous season, Prost and Renault management fell out, like really fell out. Prost felt the development of the car was too slow, and he felt Renault had made him a scapegoat for losing the 1983 championship. In an interview with ESPN, He said the car was not competitive and he didn't lose the title by his own fault. Renault fired Prost 2 days later, and Renault factory workers set fire to one of his cars. Put simply, he and the team had a falling out. Weirdly, this was probably the best thing to happen to Prost. Not his car being set on fire, but by rejoining McLaren, as 1984 was the start of the most dominant period of success for a team in F1 up to that point. McLaren won 12 of the 16 races, 7 for Prost himself and 5 for Niki Lauda. By the midpoint of the season, Prost had an 11.5 point lead over Lauda, the half point coming from the Monaco Grand Prix, which was stopped early due to heavy rain. Jason! In the last 8 races, Prost won 4 and failed to finish 4. Lauda capitalised on this and managed to win the championship of 1984 with 72 points to Prost's 71.5 points. Half a point, the narrowest winning margin in F1 history. What if number 2 for Prost? With such a narrow margin, you could argue that literally every race Prost didn't win could have been that extra moment, as he would have only needed to finish 1 place higher in the points to give him that edge. I think there were 2 defining moments, however. Lauda had one of his greatest races in the season finale in Portugal, starting 11th and finishing 2nd, but he only inherited 2nd due to Mansell's Lotus Renault giving up, unreliable Renault engines ruining Prost's chances again. The other big moment was earlier in the season at the Dallas Grand Prix, when Prost hit the wall and retired on lap 56 out of 67 whilst leading. That's the race where the track melted. Either way, that's 2 championships that he could have and should have won. McLaren was still the top car for the season, but not as dominant as 1984. Lauda had come off the boil in his final season, and in retrospect, should have done a Nico Rosberg and retired after winning the championship. Therefore, the story of the season was the battle between Prost and the Ferrari of Michele Alboreto. By round 11 of 16 at the Dutch Grand Prix, Prost had a slim 3-point lead, and it looked as if our nearly man was locked into a title fight which would go down to the wire. Which it didn't. Not only did Alboreto fail to score another point for the rest of the season, he didn't even manage to finish a race. Monza engine, Spa clutch, Brands Hatch turbo, Kyalami turbo, Adelaide transmission. Prost won another race and picked up another couple of podiums and became the Formula 1 champion for the first time by a stonking 20 points, 23 including drop scores. This is going to sound very strange to a modern F1 fan, but the idea of a driver successfully defending their title was almost unheard of at the time. Ascari managed it in 1953, Fangio in 55, 56 and 57, and Jack Brabham in 1960, and that was it. There were plenty of examples of drivers winning titles in alternate years, most notably in the early 70s. Now, 1986 is arguably one of, if not the greatest title fights in F1 history. Williams teammates Piquet and Mansell fighting against the champion Prost, and Senna racing in the glorious JPS Lotus. I'm not going to go through all the twists and turns of that great season, I'll be here all day, so I'll skip ahead to the finale. Australian Grand Prix 1986. The point situation was Mansell leading on 70, Prost second on 64, and Piquet third on 63. Something permutations and drop scores. On the start of lap 63 out of 82, the order was Piquet first, Prost second, Mansell third, which would have seen the Williams teammates tied on 72 points, and Prost third on 69. Then, on the back straight, a massive tyre blowout. Colossally, it was Nigel Mansell, putting him out of the race, and Williams boxed Piquet to change tyres to prevent the same happening to him. Prost won the race, with Piquet second, and the Frenchman became the first driver to successfully defend their world championship since Jack Brabham in 1960. Boff. In the years between 1984 and 1993, 1987 was McLaren's leanest year, though they still managed to finish second in the team's championship. Prost won 2 of the first 3 races, and he and new teammate Johansson were briefly 1-2 in the championship, but the Williams FW11B was by far the superior car. Oh, that rhymes. Prost would win 1 more race that season and finished 4th in the championship, his lowest final position since 1982. He finished behind the Williams duo of Piquet and Mansell, and the Lotus of that Brazilian chap Senna. Despite the early season success, Prost wasn't in the title fight, so moving on. Oh yeah, here we go. Maths time. Now, I'm a McLaren fan, so I'm very much biased in my opinion. In 1988, Prost and another new teammate, Senna, piloted the greatest Grand Prix car ever made, the McLaren MP44. I've written pleasure noises in my script, but I'm not going to. 16 races, 15 poles, 15 wins, and 10 race 1-2s. 7 of these went Prost's way, and the other 8 were to Senna. Now you can take or leave this what if scenario, no judgment here. Senna won the World Championship by 3 points ahead of Prost, so surely I'll just find a situation where Prost could have scored 4 more points in a given race to give him a higher points total. And that's the thing, Prost did manage this, and then some. What am I talking about? Drop scores. In this 16-round World Championship, only the best 11 results could contribute to your final points tally. Senna had 13 point scoring finishes, the 8 wins, 3 second places, a 4th and a 6th. Therefore, the only points he was forced to drop were the 3 points from his 4th place and the 1 point from his 6th, giving him a grand total of 4 dropped points. Still with me? On the other hand, Prost finished in the points 14 times, 7 wins, 7 second place finishes. Prost therefore had to drop the points from 3 of those second places, that's 18 points. If Prost's drop scores had been a driver, it would have been enough to put them 7th in the World Championship, or put 3 runner-up places in today's points, that's 54 points. Removing these drop scores, Prost would have won the championship by a comfortable 11 points. My what-if scenario is not a moment in any race, but rather the number of drop scores. With 5 drop scores, Senna wins the championship. Any fewer than that, Prost would have won, and I'd argue that he should have won in 1988. McLaren again were the class of the field, not to the same extent as 1988, but the MP4-5 won 10 out of the 16 races, with Prost and Senna finishing 1-2 in the championship. 1989 was a season where the rivalry between these two legends turned bitter. At the second round at Imola, there was an agreement suggested by Senna that whoever led into turn 1 would stay there and win the race. That was seemingly followed until Gerhardsberger's smash at Tamburello brought out the red flags, which necessitated a restart. On said restart, Prost got a better start and led into turn 1, before Senna repassed going into Tosa, breaking the agreement in almost an identical way to Pironi and Villeneuve 7 years earlier. There were only 4 McLaren 1-2s throughout the season, as the two seemed to alternate periods of success. Following the Spanish Grand Prix, the 14th round of the season, Prost had a 16-point lead over Senna, 21 without drop scores. So at the penultimate race in Japan, Senna needed to outscore Prost by 6 points. The race was dominated by the two. On the start of the 46th lap, Prost was leading, but Senna was clearly the faster. As they approached the chicane, we saw what I think is the most iconic moment in F1 history. I'm sure you know what follows. Senna gets a push start through the chicane runoff, wins the race, gets disqualified for taking a shortcut, and Prost is crowned champion. In my opinion, the block and subsequent crash was intentional on Prost's behalf, because even if the race had finished 1-2 with Senna winning, Prost would have still been champion. Instead, the collision was a result of the growing frustration and disdain between the two over the past couple of seasons. It was very much Prost having a feeling of no remorse, no repent, he didn't care what it meant. The team very much sided with the Brazilian, and Prost felt he could no longer stay with the team. Put simply, he and the team had a falling out. Prost joined up with Ferrari and teamed up with Mansell. Ferrari, Prost, Mansell, what a team, how on earth did it not work out? Despite being in different teams, Senna and Prost were again the two title protagonists. Between them, they won 11 of the 16 races, with Piquet being the only other repeat winner in the season. Senna led the championship for the vast majority of the season, but Prost was never too far behind. In fact, by the midpoint of the season at the British Grand Prix, Prost had managed to snatch a 2-point lead in the title fight. Going into the penultimate round, Japan again, it was Senna this time who was leading the championship and could claim the title. Senna claimed pole, with Prost joining him on the front row, but unusually at Suzuka, pole was on the dirtier side of the track, which Senna understandably wasn't happy about, and turns out the stewards agreed. However, FISA president, and in no way a Prost fan, Jean-Marie Balest, prevented the moving of pole from the dirty side of the track to the racing line. The second Prost got a better start from P2, I think everyone knew what was going to happen. Senna won his second world title. He later admitted the crash was intentional. A dramatic moment, but not a what-if moment. Senna was the rightful champion of that year, and even if the race had finished 1-2, assuming the results at the Australian Grand Prix were the same, Prost still wouldn't have surpassed his former teammate. Oh dear, what's happened here? Prost's least successful season was his debut in 1980. His second least successful season was 1991. Having gone from 5 wins and finishing the championship as runner-up in 1990, Prost only finished on the podium 5 times with no wins, and finished the season 5th, 62 points behind the champion Senna. The Ferraris 642 and 643 were used, with the latter being a bit more successful than the former. 4 podiums for Prost and 2 for Alesi, but the chassis suffered from significant handling issues. Towards the end of the season, Prost said a truck would be easier to drive than this car, and he was saying this about Ferrari. How did the Scuderia take this? Well, following the penultimate round, Alain Prost, by most measures the most successful Grand Prix driver by this time in history, was fired from the team. Simply put, he and the team had a falling out. Not much to report on here, because Prost found himself without a drive for the season, and ended up doing commentary for French TV. Ow. Why not go out on a bang, right? The Williams FW14B utterly dominated during Prost's sabbatical year, with Nigel Mansell setting a record number of points scored and races won in a single season, and all the big name drivers were after a drive for the team. As you can probably tell by the way I've introduced this season, it really shouldn't come as much of a surprise to learn that Prost was the big name who signed. The contract situation all round was a bit messy, which saw Mansell quit the team due to Prost's signing, and Patrese leaving the second seat for Benetton, although it turns out his seat at Williams was safe, so future world champion Damon Hill was signed to replace the veteran Italian. With the exception of a few legendary performances from Senna, European Grand Prix in particular, often considered as one of the greatest individual drives, it was clear it was going to be title number 4 for Prost. 7 wins in the first 10 races, 12 poles from the first 13. At the German Grand Prix, he won his final race, putting his career total at 51, a record number of wins which wouldn't be beaten until 2001 season by Michael Schumacher. By this point of the season, Prost had a 27-point lead over Senna and would ultimately claim his 4th title by the Portuguese round with 2 races in hand. If you're watching this obscure strange channel of mine, you probably know you're racing, and you know what's coming next. Well, either you know your stuff, or you're a friend of mine who I've bullied into watching this. Which are you? Let me know in the comments down below. Despite putting lots of bitterness behind them, Prost was not willing to be teammates with Senna again, so when the Brazilian signed with the Grove team for the tragic 1994 season, Prost called time on his racing career. At the time, Prost was the most successful driver by wins, and only one world title off Fangio's record of 5. Had history played out slightly differently in these key moments, Prost might have been the sport's first 7-time world champion. Which other drivers snatched defeat from the jaws of victory? I have a few ideas who I could cover for the next video, but I'd love to know your suggestions. Thanks for watching.